Hello everyone! Today I'm going to be featuring the Odin. Now that we know how we're going to build it, that is shipyard, and for the fact that if you really want this ship, not only do you have to grind 18 directives, but you also have to pay 3,500 doubloons. So there's a fair bit of effort completing all the full directives in time and paying the extra doubloons. The question of course now remains, is the ship worth it? The matchmaking is pretty nice because it's all tier 8 and that's about as close as a comparison you can get. There's not too many DDs though, which is actually a significant advantage for the Odin, something I will get into more detail later. Odin, well, the armor on it is great. It's got 32mm upper nose plating. It does, however, have access to an icebreaker, a 60mm icebreaker, so you can close the distance with the likes of Yamato and Musashi and such without being overmatched. It's got a 45mm upper belt and a 50mm deck armor, which makes you resistant to most forms of HE, except of course supercruiser HE or alternatively the likes of Hindenburg. The built armor is 320mm, which perhaps isn't really that impressive. In fact, you could say the armor is quite thin, but on the other hand, it is with a turtleback behind it. So you got significant turtleback protection behind it, which means no, you will extremely unlikely that you will ever be Citadel, but just like the Bismarck and Tirpitz, the chance of eating full penetrations is extremely high because of that upper belt armor and of course the Citadel armor being so thick that it pretty much arms all the AP being shot at your broadside. It does sit fairly high in the water as well. Well, most tier 8 BBs do, so expect to eat a fair bit of full penetrations. A significant weakness here is, however, that it only has a 22% torpedo belt. Now, a 22% torpedo belt doesn't sound that bad. I mean, okay, there are worse. Well, I think there's one worse, and that's like... No, there's two worse, Vladivostok and North Carolina. The Americans, Massachusetts, Alabamas, they are well in the 40s. Amagi is well in the 40s. Roma is 38. Even the French are well above 30%. So Odin having 22% torpedo belt means that you are, of course, exceptionally vulnerable to torpedoes. You do, however, have access to hydro, and it is a 5km hydro, 3.5 km torpedo detection range. However, the handling on the ship isn't really that special. You got a fairly tight turning circle, 790 meters. It's better than the other Germans, but of course loses to the Americans. The rudder shift is 14.1, which is quite nice, loses to the Russians and I think the Vanguard, but overall the rudder shift is maybe a second or two faster than the Americans and the other Germans. But fundamentally my point is that you still handle like a battleship. So, and just like many other battleships, just because you can see torpedoes doesn't mean that you can evade them. Even with Hydra active, turning into the torpedoes, you need that perfect gap, otherwise you will be eating those torpedoes. For most battleships, that's not that big of a deal. For the Odin, eating those torpedoes with a 22% torpedo belt hurts, especially because the Odin's health pool has been nerfed so very heavily. It used to be 62.7k health, now it's 52.8k. Roughly 10k health removal. In fact, moving into the game that you're seeing right now, this is a game, the last time I showed the Odin, I showed what the Odin could have been. That was basically the dream come true brawling situation where I managed to dodge all the torpedoes. This game is more focused on how to get the most value out of your Odin. How to play the Odin. And you will notice that we are playing very much like a North Carolina. However, unlike a North Carolina, well, we don't have the overmatch or the guns or the dispersion or the penetration, which I will get into. But we're playing significantly safer because, well, we're kind of forced to play significantly safer. Because going back to that health pool nerf, good lord, that thing hurts. This hurts so bad. I've been really trying to like the Odin because I've really enjoyed the ship. I've been really trying to push in, I've been trying to brawl, but fundamentally, the lowest health tier 8 battleship in the game, besides the Odin, is the Monarch. Monarch is A, stealthy. It's got significantly better concealment than you do. I think Monarch can get something like 11.5 km concealment on the ship. You can get 12 on the Odin. So it's significantly stealthier, and more importantly, it's more of an HE spammer because it's Royal Navy. So the only ship that's even within, I'd say, what, almost 10k health of you is a ship that is fundamentally a stealthy long-range HE spammer. Because Wargaming knows very well that if you want to play a brawling battleship, if you want to play a battleship that can push in and brawl with the enemy, you need a health, you need a buffer. That's why they gave, for example, the Kremlin 108k health. That's why they gave the Große Kurfürst 105k health. That's why, in comparison, the Bismarck has 69 point what? 2k? And the Tirpitz has 69.3k health. These things have 15k more health. No, scratch that. 17k more health almost than this thing. For the simple reason that in order to be an effective brawler, you need to have a health pool buffer that keeps you alive as you close the distance. And the Odin fundamentally lacks this feature. And whereas other ships that lack this feature have other compensations. We mentioned the Monarch, he's got that HE power. But there are other ships that might not be well suited for brawling, like let's say North Carolina, a fairly vulnerable Citadel. But in return you got amazing 406mm guns that can overmatch, can blap anything, great penetration, all these things. Or the Roma, which has incredible tankiness and incredible concealment. Roma lacks anything to allow it to fulfill its role, because, well, moving on, the guns the Odin lacks anything to fulfill its role, because moving on, the Odin guns are 305mm guns. They are nice if you get flat broadsides, but even then you can see the consistency might not be the best. That's a Bagration. I broke the engine on him. He's sitting there with a broken engine and literally not moving, and I keep shooting at his broadside and I cannot kill him, because the consistency isn't quite there. And even when you do score Citadels, like here, the Citadel Alpha is very low. In fact, the Citadel Alpha is 9.4k across the board, the lowest of all the BBs. I think the second lowest is, what, the Germans at 11.6, so nowhere near. So your AP Alpha is dreadful. Now you make up for it in a bit with the reload, but ultimately in a battleship, Alpha is so much more useful than a fast reload. And the HE is of course dreadful. It's German HE, and even the German HE is so bad that your HE Alpha is actually terrible. In fact, if a Royal Navy ship, hell, if an American ship like a North Carolina, if they loaded HE, they do better HE DPM than the Odin does. Which leads to a lot of silly situations where you shoot even destroyers with this HE and you don't really do any damage to them because the Alpha is so underwhelming. The AP itself is, well, it's got a short fuse on it, or a short fuse arming time on it. And the fuse arming threshold isn't of course as bad as the rest because of the lower caliber, but in return you cannot overmatch basically anything you face. I mean, sure, you can overmatch ships that you that are up tier 6s and such, but facing your own tier, like in this game, there is not a single cruiser or battleship we can overmatch the nose armor on. And even then, full broadside, the penetration isn't award-winning either. It's such a huge chunk below even the worst. Like, Monarch has something like 80mm better penetration than you do at 10 kilometers. Monarch AP vastly outshines the Odin AP in performance. So, this leads to multiple fundamental issues. Because, for example, in Massachusetts, if you push into brawl, if you go around a corner and you catch a ship, let's say a nose-in cruiser, the Massachusetts will start shredding that cruiser in multiple different ways. The secondaries will start melting him, the guns will start overmatching him, and he will start melting. In the Odin, well, he'll bounce the guns, the secondaries aren't really that special, and Odin doesn't have a lot of health going for it, and unlike, for example, Massachusetts fast reloading heal, well, that's actually one of the things I would love to see, a fast reloading heal on it. The Odin lacks all these things. So unless they are very, very potato and they provide a lot of broadside to you, you will not be doing a whole lot in the Odin. And this has become very apparent in many of the pushes I made, where the ship doesn't play nice. When the player captaining the enemy ship doesn't just go up and brawl me full broadside, but he just angles or starts kiting away or anything similar, and you quickly realize the Odin doesn't have any tools. In fact, speaking of kiting away, the Odin is actually faster than, slower than the other German battleships. It does 30 knots. Tirpitz does 30.5, Bismarck does 31. So you even lose to them in speed. There's not a whole lot going for you. The ship was fun. The thing that made the ship stand out was, of course, the combination of having torpedoes and hydro. That was the main gimmick of the Odin. Now, torpedoes and hydro are both gimmicks that are only useful if you can brawl. I mean, okay, sure, okay, hydro can be useful if someone torps you and you manage to spot them, whatever. But generally speaking, hydro is only useful if you're in a situation where you can be torpedoed. In this case, protecting you while you're pushing in. Torpedoes, well, they were always kind of iffy on the Odin because they're located in the back of the ship. The argument could be made that torpedoes located in the back of the ship have a smaller chance of breaking, but ultimately it means that the enemy ships have to get much closer to you before you can effectively torpedo them, and your torpedoes have a significantly longer travel time. So the fundamental gimmick of the Odin was always trading off gun caliber, and trading off this alpha damage, this overmatch, this raw penetration, trading all of this for an exceptionally good brawler. That was the role, the point of the Odin. By taking 10k health away, putting it at 52.8k health compared to, let's say, Tirpitz 69.3, it can no longer effectively fulfill that role. I've struggled to fulfill my brawling role against tier 6, tier 7 ships. In fact, I played a game where I was up against the likes of West Virginias and such, and I pushed in. The German turtleback protected me from being Citadeled, but when they blap you for 15-20k, and you only have a bit more than 50k health, you go down painfully fast. Adding something like eating a torpedo, well, that's pretty much lights out, or God forbid a carrier harassing, like in this game, and the health pool depletes so incredibly quickly on this ship. I do not really understand why they went out of their way to so butcher the role of the ship. At no point did I think the Odin was overpowered in the past. The Odin could be dealt with quite easily, like literally. It was kind of like it was kind of like being rushed by a Tirpitz, except a worse Tirpitz. Because the Tirpitz can't overmatch you, the Tirpitz doesn't have terrifying secondaries, the Tirpitz guns don't hit nearly as hard and can't overmatch. Like, it was a lesser Tirpitz rushing you. It wasn't that big of a deal. But now they've made this thing. I realize this probably because they're giving it away as a reward ship or whatever. But good lord, it hurts to watch. Note that this game, I've shown you how you kind of have to play the Odin now, and that's of course this long-range, very safe gameplay. Now you might look at the damage, wow, 186k damage, but then if you go back and look at what I actually did this game, and then imagine that I was instead in North Carolina, you realize I literally played it like a long-range battleship, and North Carolina would have done much better, with harder hitting guns, better penetration, better accuracy. As soon as we're trying to push in, well, in this case, I was hoping to kill a full broadside Massachusetts. It's giving me so much broadside at 8 km a distance, but dispersion isn't really there, and you saw that shatter. That was my AP shattering on his Citadel. Didn't have enough penetration to actually get a Citadel on him, so he's still alive. Carrier starts chiming in. The second you push up, you become a target. That's the way it works. He's giving me even more broadside, another AP volley, and once again, nothing. Very underwhelming damage. Popping the Hydro in case the Irian torpedoes, because I do kind of want to push in, but killing the Massachusetts is taking so much longer than I hoped, because he's got that fast reloading heal, which is actually keeping him alive. Irian gives me flat broadside, 6 km, shoot him, dispersion, kind of all over the place. We get 4 hits in a Citadel, but the alpha damage is so low that it doesn't actually kill him. Massachusetts is still alive, and here comes the nightmare. We eat a torpedo. Even though we had Hydro, even though we angled in, we couldn't fit the gap, because ultimately we are still a battleship, and now our health pool is simply evaporating. At this point, I do decide to at least try to finish off this guy. Still no citadels, but with 4 pins, we do get the kill at least. And we finally go down. Well, finally, as soon as we started brawling, you could see just how underwhelming the survivability is in any sort of real-world situation. Would it have gone better if you hadn't eaten the torp? Sure, of course, but I mean, that's kind of brawling battleship life. If you want to push in, there's always a risk of getting those torpedoes in. I've had situations where it's not a cruiser or DD torping me, but it's a carrier coming in and torping me. And trust me, with a 22% torpedo belt, those carrier torps really, really hurt. And they also completely shred your gameplay. And considering how often we see carriers in games these days, Odin pushing in doesn't really work. The game ends 226k damage. If you once again, so one of my major pet peeves is if I post a game where I do little damage and then say this is my average standard game in this ship, I don't recommend it. Then I get comments from people who have watched some other YouTuber who's posted their best game, and then he goes, well, this other guy said that the ship is actually pretty okay and he did twice as much damage, so surely his opinion matters more. And this is why I always recommend watch multiple sources and get a broad view, because YouTubers always cherry pick. This is absolutely a cherry picked game, because this was not playing the Odin the way Wargaming hoped it would be played, or the way we kind of hoped this ship would be played. This was Odin playing safe. Yes, we took a central position. I love taking central positions, but ultimately we didn't really brawl. We just sat there taking pot shots. We played the Odin like a North Carolina until it was time to play the Odin as a Tirpitz, and as soon as we played the Odin as a Tirpitz, we instantly died. That is kind of the lesson I wanted to impact from this game. 1 kill, 7 citadels, 113 hits in total. In fact, looking at the team score, we almost got 3,000 base. My team ended up winning. Basically, the surface ships traded, or well, the carriers went in and killed anyone who was alive, as it tends to be. Really fun class, by the way, adds a lot to the game. And then we sat and watched as the carriers sent planes at each other and then shot them down. And the game ended in a victory because we had a points lead at this point. Detail report-wise, 113 hits, 222k damage. On average, I guess you could say we did 2k per shell, mostly thanks to the citadels. Struggled to get citadels on any battleships whatsoever, even a full broadside Massachusetts, just presenting the broadside at all times. Potential, almost 1.7 million, always nice. Damage received, well, as soon as the torpedoes of course hurt, we took them mostly on the nose, which mitigated the Irian torpedo somewhat. But even then, even just 23k health hurts you so much when you got 52k. Fundamentally, I don't understand why Wargaming did this. At no point did I think the Odin was a bad influence on the game. In fact, Odin was one of the ships that I really loved being added to the game, because we have had so many passive, boring ships being added. The entire carrier rework made everything more passive, because you couldn't even time your offensive gameplay around shooting down planes and then pushing in. And then you added all these ships stuff like Smolensk that just parks in a smoke and anything that pushes in gets melted and farmed to death. Or ships like Holland with basically undodgeable torpedoes. You try to push into Holland, it doesn't matter if you're running Hydro, you're still gonna get torpedoed. So they're adding all these ships that are just slowing down the game and making it more boring. And Odin was a breath of fresh air. Odin was a ship that, well, it's not very good. It's probably one of the worst tier 8 battleships when you have to play it at range. But when you could push in, when you could brawl, it had a lot of things going for it. It had good maneuverability, not great. It had both hydro and torpedoes. The guns, easy to angle against, but if you got your broadside, man, and with that German turtleback, there was a ship that fundamentally encouraged aggression. But with 10k health less, how could I possibly recommend this ship? How can I recommend a ship that has 8k health less than a Monarch and is expected to push in? It doesn't work. It has the same torpedo belt as the Monarch. No, absolutely not. It saddens me to say it, but the only reason really to get the Odin is because you have extra doubloons lying around, or you're a collector, or perhaps, I mean, you're a big German fan, whatever, but like from a perfectly gameplay perspective, from a competitive perspective, this is facing a Massachusetts will dumpster this thing. A Tirpitz will dumpster it. A Bismarck probably will dumpster it as well. I mean, I fought the Bismarck who just ate me alive in this thing. I tried to do anything, but he was faster, he hit harder, he had secondaries, he had Hydra. Like, what am I supposed to do against that thing? Odin could have been great, but this neutered version of the Odin, if you have resources lying around, sure you can get it, but if you think that you're gonna need this from any sort of competitive perspective, no, that's never gonna happen. Oh, there is nothing setting Odin apart, except it's one of the easiest battleships in the game to devastating strikes with torpedoes. I think, I wonder if an IGN ship can devastate it in 3 torpedoes. Maybe not quite, we'll see. Regardless, let me show you guys my recommended build for this ship. Right, as always, let me start with the modules. Well, not much to talk about. Run spotter plane instead of fighter, because, well, I did actually forget to mention, your range is pretty anemic at 19.1. For a battleship, it's fairly anemic. Extending the range and being able to smoke fire is obviously highly recommended. What's Roma's range? That might be worse, actually. Yeah, Roma is 18.1 with spotter. Nice. Odin does beat someone. Upgrade-wise, turret, survival. Yes, these turrets can sadly absolutely break. I think in North Carolina, I tried to rush in North Carolina, and he just kept shooting AP at my nose and ship, and he permanently destroyed my back turret, or my second turret. So yeah, that's also kind of a counter against Odin. Turrets can absolutely be blown up. Keep that in mind. Hydro duration, better dispersion on the guns, faster rudder shift to kind of try to make use of this turning circle. Once again, it's not by any means the best turning circle. The Americans have like, what, 710? But you do need the maneuverability to just try to survive against torpedoes, because this combination on a ship this large is quite dreadful. And finally, concealment. Once again, not the best. The likes of Monarch, the likes of Roma, these will all have better concealment than you, but it's pretty good. You get it down to 12, which is quite a nice value. Build-wise, I do run my standard battleship build, which is priority target, adrenaline rush, superintendent, fire prevention, concealment expert. Faster turret traverse, I do quite like it because, well, they're pretty fast, but you kind of want to play it more like a battlecruiser than a battleship. So, and if you are forced to brawl, you want to maximize it. Expert loader, because, well, there will be situations where you're forced to load HE, even though the fire chance isn't the best at 27. Honestly, it's pretty terrible, and the alpha is pretty terrible as well. There, you simply have to do it because that's the only way you'll deal damage to some ships. And finally, jack of all trades. Flag-wise, I think the standard recommendation is probably good, but fire reduction, flooding reduction, healing, speed, faster consumables. Then you can add in secondaries and ramming, I guess. Once again, the torpedoes, something I mentioned I don't like. The torpedoes are located back here, and what this means is that in order to effectively land them on a ship that's pushing you, you basically have to allow the ship to almost make it to the center of your ship. Which means if you're fighting and something like, well, let's say NC, Yamagi, basically anything, they will get that final shot in on your broadside if they're holding on to it when you launch your torpedoes. So the torpedoes by no means make it some sort of brawling beast. In fact, the torpedoes are because of their positioning. I like Tirpitz torpedoes more. Yes, they break easier because they're in the center, but the fact that you can launch them on a nose-in ship pushing in is, in my opinion, a significant advantage. Overall, Odin is a gorgeous ship, and I really loved the ship, but sadly what we have in the game right now is practically impossible to recommend. Sucks, man. I really liked it, but nothing I can say. I thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for watching. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you feel like dropping a sub, I will greatly appreciate it, because we're approaching 99,000 subs, and after that 100k is around the corner, which means a big giveaway time. Regardless, Thank you for watching, I'll talk to you guys next time.